Systemic racism, one of the greatest lies ever told to the American people through the mainstream media. It has convinced white people to feel shame just for being the color that they were born as, and it has tricked black people into a victim mindset. This is awful. It is dividing the races, and it is only leading to more racism. It's no good. So today we are going to be reacting to and debunking a cartoon about good old systemic racism.
This is Jamal. Jamal is a boy who lives in a poor neighborhood. He has a friend named Kevin, who lives in a wealthy neighborhood. All of Jamal's neighbors are African American, and all of Kevin's neighbors are white. Because Jamal's school district is mostly funded by property taxes, his school is not very well funded. His classrooms are overcrowded, his teachers are underpaid, and he doesn't have access to high-quality tutors or extracurricular activities. Kevin's school district is also funded by property taxes, so his school is very well funded. His classrooms are never crowded, his teachers are very well paid, and he has access to high-quality tutors and lots of extracurricular activities. Kevin and Jamal live only a few streets away from each other. So how come they're growing up in such different worlds with such different opportunities for success?
So what he's obviously about to state is that racism is the reason why these two boys are growing up in such different circumstances. But the truth is, it's because of income, because of overall wealth of the families. If you live in a wealthier neighborhood, will have more opportunities given to wealthier people. That's just the truth of our reality, and that can't be changed without socialism, which will, of course, result in everybody being poor and nobody having good standards and everybody having to live like the poor family. It's not a race thing, it's an economics thing.
The answer has to do with America's history of systemic racism. To understand it better, let's look at what life was like for Kevin and Jamal's grandparents. Decades after the Civil War, many government agencies started to draw maps dividing cities into sections that were either desirable or undesirable for investment. This practice was called redlining, and it usually blocked off entire black neighborhoods from access to private and public investment. Banks and insurance companies used these maps for decades to deny black people loans and other services based purely on race.
So here's what they won't tell you about this whole bank loans thing. It wasn't just racist white bankers that weren't giving and still won't give loans to black people compared to white people in the same circumstances. The truth is, black bankers and black-owned banks in general are just as unlikely to give a bank loan to a black family. Why is this? Because black people are significantly less likely than any other group to not pay back a bank loan. As businessmen, they have to recognize this trend, and because of it, they are less likely to give a loan to black people. It's unfortunate that this is a reality, and it's unfortunate that this precedent has been set, and because it is slightly unfair to some black people, but they have to recognize this trend, and it's clearly not rooted in racism, as you can see the trend between both white and black-owned banks.
Historically speaking, owning a home and getting a college education is the easiest way for an American family to build wealth. But when Jamal's grandparents wanted to buy a house, the banks refused because they lived in a neighborhood that was redlined. So Jamal's grandparents were not able to buy a home, and because colleges could prevent them from attending through legal segregation, their options for higher education were really scarce. Kevin's grandparents, on the other hand, got a low-interest loan to buy their first house and got accepted into a handful of top universities, which traditionally only accepted white students. This opened up a wealth of opportunities that they were able to pass on to their kids and grandkids. Even as late as the 1980s, an investigation into the Atlanta real estate market showed that banks were more willing to lend to low-income white families than to middle or upper-income African-American families.
I already covered why this is, pretty self-explanatory. Not racism, just economics.
As a result, today, for every $100 of wealth held by a white family, black families have $5.04. A 2017 study confirms that redlining is still affecting home values in major cities like Chicago today. This explains how Kevin and Jamal inherited vastly different circumstances. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. A big part of systemic racism is implicit bias. These are prejudices in society that people are not aware that they have. Let's go back to Kevin and Jamal. Against all odds, Jamal manages to be the only student from his high school to get accepted into a great university, the same one that Kevin and his high school friends are attending. But after Kevin and Jamal both graduate, Jamal notices that his resume isn't drawing as much interest as Kevin's, even though they graduated from the same program with the exact same GPA. Unfortunately for Jamal, studies show that resumes with white-sounding names get twice as many callbacks as identical resumes with black-sounding names.
Alright, so now we have to explore why is this? Again, it's not actually a race thing. It's a poor sounding name thing. Another study was conducted that used the most popular white name and the most popular black name. The two groups had the exact same number of callbacks. There wasn't a difference. But when you use a name like Jamal, like they did in the study, that you get less callbacks. Why? Because Jamal is a poorer sounding name. But if you use John and whatever the most popular black name is, then you actually experience the exact same results. Why? Because again, it's not a race thing, but an economics thing.
Implicit bias is one of the reasons why the black unemployment rate is twice the rate of white unemployment, even among college graduates today. You can see evidence of systemic racism in every area of life. The disparities in family wealth, incarceration rates, political representation, and education are all examples of systemic racism.
Alright, so let's break down each of these examples that they give of systemic racism. First of all, wealth. It's an economics thing. A poor white kid is in just as bad of a situation as a poor black kid. It's not because of racism, it's because poor people are in a worse circumstance, and that's just how life works. It's not always fair. Next, we have incarceration rates. You don't see black people in prison more because they just get convicted more for whatever reason. You see them in jail more because as a group they commit more crimes. So of course they are going to end up in jail more often. Now, some people may argue, well, black people are more likely to get convicted of the same crime as a white person, right? But this doesn't take away all the extra variables, like the way somebody dresses in court, their mannerisms, how they talk to the judge, right? So the only way we can actually figure out if this has any truth to it is if we manage to get rid of all of these circumstances, which we can't do naturally. We'd have to do some sort of study that doesn't actually involve real criminal cases because we would have to perfectly copy the mannerisms between the two groups, right? Between a white person and a black person. It's not a race thing, more than likely in this circumstance as well. It's more of just because of the way people act in court. It is much more likely to explain why we see different incarceration rates. Next up here we have representation. Why do you see less representation of black people in politics? Maybe it's because they make up so much smaller of a population than white people. The group with the highest population is going to have the most representation. That's just logical. It's not going to be 50-50 because the population isn't 50-50. It just doesn't make sense. You're going to have more white people run, so you're going to see more white people have representation in office. That's just kind of obvious. And finally, you have education. You could actually make an argument against this, right? People take away opportunities, like colleges, from Asians and white Americans and give them to black kids. Why? Because of this whole idea where we need more representation in groups. So kids are looked over because of their race because they just have to have some kind of representation of black kids in their college. So really, they have an easier time getting into college, which is actually a bad thing for the group overall, which most people will not tell you about because when you let kids in that aren't ready for college and you just let them in because of their race, oftentimes they end up with the debt, but they can't finish, so they end up dropping out. So it actually hurts black kids more that they have this advantage, to be completely honest with you. But again, not a race thing. This stuff isn't because of racism.
Unfortunately, the biggest challenge with systemic racism is that there's no single person or entity responsible for it, which makes it very hard to solve. So what can you do? The first thing you can do is work towards becoming more aware of your own implicit biases. What are some prejudices that you might hold that you're not aware of? Second, let's acknowledge that the consequences of slavery and Jim Crow laws are still affecting access to opportunity today. As a result, we should support systemic changes that create more equal opportunities for everyone. Increasing public school funding and making it independent from property taxes would be a great start.
So here's the thing about making public education and the public schools not based around the communities itself. One, it makes it so all of our schools are going to be drastically worse. Our schools are already bad enough. Then when you do this, it's just going to make the good schools bad too. Really, what we need is more of a school of choice. That would be much better. School of choice would be so much superior to just throwing more money at the bad schools and taking it away from good schools. That is not how we are going to solve the problem.
So that poor and wealthy districts can receive equal access to resources. Systemic problems require systemic solutions. Luckily, we're all part of the system, which means that we all have a role to play in making it better. Peace.
So obviously, racism isn't our problem. It's an economics disparity. And that's just how the world is always going to work. If you're born into a wealthier family, you will have more opportunities. We are all born into different circumstances, and it's going to be a different level of challenge for all of us. The beauty of America is because it's capitalist, right? Anybody can work their way out. We're starting to lose this thanks to good old transnational corporations. We are becoming more and more of slaves, and we are inching closer and closer to fall on communism, which would be terrible. And that's what systemic racism will inevitably result in if we listen to what they want, right? What it is trying to make a completely equal opportunity for everybody. And the only way this would be possible is if we start taking away from wealthier communities and giving to poor communities. You have to take away from the rich and give to the poor. And that's just not fair to the people who worked hard and worked their butts off to set their family up well. That just it's just as unfair as being born into a poor family. It's unfortunate that we don't have it equal and we can't all just be rich at the same time and have an easy life, I guess. But, that's one of the beauties of it too, right? Anybody can work their way out of any situation, and we have the ability and power to overcome hard times to turn ourselves into something great. And that is not an opportunity I would ever want to give up. But I'm going to wrap it up on that note. If you enjoyed, like, subscribe, share the video so we can get the message out there. The only way we're going to win this war is together. So keep on fighting, boys. So long, peace out, and God bless y'all.